This is a Lexus RC-F. It's a sporty, high-performance coupe with a cool look, with 467 horsepower, and with a 0 to 60 time of 4.4 seconds. And yet, no one is buying it. Today, I'm going to try to find out why. Now, I've borrowed this RC-F here in Los Angeles using Turo, which is this service that lets you rent out other people's interesting, cool cars instead of your normal, boring, everyday rental cars you get from Enterprise. You can sign up for Turo using the link in the description below and get $25 off your first rental. Now, Turo gives me a budget to rent cars, and I chose the RC-F because I figured, wouldn't it be cool to check out a really fast Lexus coupe? Unfortunately, no one else seems to think that. Here's what I mean. The RC's chief rival is the BMW 4 Series, and the 4 Series has outsold the RC roughly 3 to 1 since the RC first came out for the 2015 model year. Now, the base level RC 350 is floundering, and the high-performance RC-F is doing even worse. Lexus hoped this car would attract people away from the BMW M4, but it seems BMW M4 buyers just keep buying BMW M4s. And friends of mine who work at Lexus dealers are telling me that these things are only going out the door with really big discounts. So why is that? Well, today I'm going to give you my thoughts. First, I'm going to show you around the RC-F and show you all of its interesting quirks and features, and then I'm going to get it out on the road and see how it drives, and then I'm going to give it a DougScore. And for more of my thoughts on the RC-F, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've written a column about it. Now, I'm going to start with the RC-F's quirks and features under the hood. Now, when you pop the hood and look at the engine, you'll find that, frankly, it's a fairly standard engine with nothing especially compelling, although there are a couple of exceptions. For example, you'll find that the intake manifold is painted in this blue tint. Now, Lexus did that because the F high-performance brand color is blue, and if you look at the F badges on the outside of the car or the inside, you'll find them ringed in this blue tint that is also on the intake manifold. Now, speaking of those F badges, you will also find one on the plastic engine cover, although you'll notice this plastic engine cover is a little different from usual ones. Yes, it's just a standard gray plastic cover, but the top part has this fake carbon fiber weave. Come on, Lexus. We all know about fake carbon fiber, but this is just ridiculous. It's clearly the same material as the rest of the engine cover, and a kind of car enthusiast who spots the carbon weave is also gonna obviously know that this one is fake. Next, with the hood closed, you can take a look at the front end styling of this car. Now, normally I don't consider styling to be a quirk or a feature, but in this car I gotta make an exception because the front end styling of this car, well, there's just a lot of it. Look at all of this, all these bends and creases and curves and lines. Like it or hate it, there's a lot going on up front. Of course, this also includes Lexus's distinctive spindle grille design, which has been, well, rather controversial to say the least. Personally, I kind of like how it looks on this car and a lot of other Lexus cars, although I think it's not attractive at all when it's scaled up to fit on the SUVs. In addition, there are a couple of other interesting quirks in front. I really like the three-prong headlight design. It looks like a force of headlights is coming at you. Also interesting are the LED running lights. In this car, I've always felt they look kind of like check marks. The interesting thing is that when you put the turn signal on, the LED running light turns off. That's by federal mandate. The LED running light is too bright to be competing with the turn signal, so they have to turn off the LED running light when you turn on the turn signal, just like a lot of other cars. Turn the signal back off and the LED running light check mark comes back on. Next up, a couple of interesting things on the side of the RC-F. Now, one of the things I've noticed is it's a little bit hard sometimes to tell apart the RC-F with the big V8 from the base model, the RC-350, especially because there's an F-Sport version of the RC-350 that doesn't have the V8. But one surefire way you can tell them apart, only the RC-F models have this little vent in front of the front doors that runs down and into the rocker panel. That little vent is an easy way to tell apart the high-performance RC-F from the regular model. Another interesting item on the side of the RC-F, how about right behind the rear wheel arch, there's this little plastic thing.
Lexus had to install that because the tires stick out just barely beyond the fenders, and that's not allowed by government regulation. So all RC-F models have this weird little plastic piece on the wheel arch.
Meanwhile, around back, there are a couple of interesting quirks to the RC-Fs. As for the brake lights, one of the things that I've been told by Lexus people is they form an L on that side of the car to stand for Lexus and to roughly mimic the L badge that Lexus has. Now that makes sense to me, except there's a bit of a problem. What about the brake lights on the other side, which seem to form a J? I don't really know how to explain that, and I'm not really sure if Lexus knows how to also. Other interesting things, the back of the RC-F, this car has quad exhausts, and not little fake quad exhausts like some performance cars now, true quad exhausts that come out exactly where Lexus says they do. So you got a naturally aspirated V8 and quad exhaust. You think this thing is gonna sound pretty good. Well, take a listen.
In the end, it sounds okay, but not as aggressive as you might expect.
Another thing I find interesting in the back of the RC-F is the rear wing. Now, so many German performance cars of this price point in this class have these adjustable rear wings that go way up and really accentuate the fact that they're high performance cars. In the RC-F, here's what the wing looks like in the down position, and then here's what the wing looks like in the up position. It goes up like an inch. I don't think it actually provides any sort of functional downforce, and it also really doesn't help your style all that much to show off to people that you got a cool rear wing. Now, for a couple of other interesting RC-F related items around back, we have to open the trunk. Now, with the trunk open, it's a fairly normal sized trunk, about what I'd expect for a vehicle in this class. There are a couple of interesting things about the trunk though, one of which is this little net. Now, this net isn't a cargo divider to keep your stuff from rolling around and sort of separate it in the back. Instead, it's actually like a little net bag where you can put the stuff that you don't want to roll around. Interestingly, this little net bag is Lexus branded. Also interesting is the trunk pass-through. Now, if you're taking this car, for example, skiing, and for whatever reason you can't mount skis on a ski rack on top, maybe you'll want the skis to stick all the way through the car. So there is a little pass-through in the back seats for you to be able to do that. This is not particularly unusual. A lot of cars have this, but the unusual thing is that Lexus, in true Toyota and Lexus cautious spirit, there's like an enormous warning label stuck on the back of that thing inside the trunk that is absolutely impossible to read. The gist, I guess, is that basically you're supposed to pull it up in the trunk and maybe pull it in the back seat, and eventually you get it open and you can stick your ski in the car, which will of course then impale you if you get in an accident. Good luck. Lexus is not liable. Next up, it's time to move inside and discuss the obvious, and that would be the RC's rear seats. Yes, this car has rear seats for reasons completely unknown to me. People won't buy coupes unless they think they can carry someone in back, even though they never do. And now I'm going to try to get in back. The first step is move the seat forward. You pull a little latch on the back of the seat, it moves forward, and then and now I'm in the back of the RC. Now, it's incredibly tight back here. If I were to put the seat back, it would whir back into place. There wouldn't be enough room for my legs, and then I would be crushed to death. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to tell you that I think these rear seats weren't really designed for human use, and Lexus just figured, nobody's going to use them. So they left a couple of interesting things back here, one of which is a speaker. There's a speaker in the back, but it's sort of mounted randomly right in the middle of the panel to the left of the rear seat occupants, who basically won't exist. Also interesting, there is a rear center armrest, but there's no way to get it out. Most cars have a little tab, you just pull and it comes down, and this thing, you gotta kind of wedge your finger in there and then pull it down, and if you can do that, then you can have a center armrest, but otherwise you're just screwed. Next up, how about the fact that the climate control vents for the rear passengers, which, by the way, it's weird that they exist at all, but how about the fact that they point directly at the rear center console, meaning if you're sitting back here and you've wedged out your armrest and you're trying to get a little air, well, too bad. Instead, all the air is going on that center console. But maybe the strangest thing back here is the lid over the cup holders, or maybe it's the fact that there are two cup holders in a rear seat that no one's going to sit in. But really, the lid is especially strange because it has the F logo on it. Now, I find that odd because Lexus hasn't overdone all of the logos for this car like some brands do. Instead, the F logos are fairly subtle. They've only placed them in 3 places in this car. There's one in the speedometer where you expect it, there's one in the steering wheel where you expect it, and then there's one on the lid in the back seats over the cup holders. What the hell sense does that make? Next up, moving on to the front seats of the RC-F, the first thing you notice when you climb inside this car is just how beautiful everything is, and I mean that. The interior materials are absolutely excellent. The seats are made of this gorgeous material, and they have this nice design in them. The door panels are just nice material after nice material after nice material. Everything you touch and feel just seems absolutely excellent, including the materials in the center control stack. There's no really cheap plastic in this car. Everything looks good and feels good. The interior of this car is an excellent place to spend time. The other thing you notice when you climb inside is when you turn the car on, a little graphic comes on that says RC, and you think, oh, I got an RC-F and I didn't get my own graphic, and then F, so that you're reminded you don't have just the base level RC. And speaking of that little gauge cluster screen, there are a couple of really cool things in the gauge cluster, one of which is the little F display inside that configurable screen on the left. Now, the little F display gives you a lot of different performance functions, but this one is my favorite. The thing in the middle, the big circle, that's a G meter, and when you start going around corners, it'll tell you how many G's you're pulling, which is kind of a gimmick, but it's also kind of cool. Another cool thing inside the gauge cluster screen is it displays your speed in like a 1980s clock font. I don't know why they just didn't give it to us in a normal font, but that's the one they chose, and so that's how you see your speed. This is like the most advanced screen you can see in a car in a gauge cluster, and yet you're still looking at the font you had in your bedroom clock when you woke up for school in 1986. Now, beyond that gauge cluster screen, I haven't really covered all that many Lexus models, so I think it's time to take a closer look at the other screen inside this car, and that would be Lexus's remote touch interface. Now, the remote touch interface has been very controversial since it came out because it's sort of an odd way of dealing with the infotainment screen in the center of the car. Take a look. There are various icons arrayed normally like in an infotainment screen, but you can't just touch them. If you touch them, nothing happens. It isn't a touch screen. Instead, you use this little controller in the center of the car next to the gear lever, and you slide to whatever you want, and then you click down like a computer mouse. Now, this system has been very controversial, especially with car reviewers, because they say it's just a little bit too distracting. It takes your eyes off the road. Instead of a touchscreen where you just tap a button, or even a little wheel where you scroll to what you want and then tap, in this thing, it's sort of freeform. You gotta find what you want and then click. It gives you feedback when you get to something that you can click, but you still have to take your eyes off the road more than a usual system. Now, I personally don't hate remote touch as much as some people. I realize that it takes some getting used to, but I think once you get used to it, you could enjoy it. One other thing I find interesting in the remote touch interface, if you go into the fuel consumption tab, it shows you your fuel consumption, some stats, whatever. It also shows you your best and your average. Now, if you look at this, you'll notice that best is actually lower than average. Obviously, you'd think that best would be better than average if you're trying to achieve an excellent fuel economy, but maybe in the RC-F, the high-performance version, you're trying to get as low fuel economy as possible. So when it says best, that's how badly you did because you were driving fast and having fun. Something else I love in here, I really like the blue and white contrasting stitching. Those are the F performance colors, and I like that they sort of incorporated them throughout the interior. My favorite spot is on the gear lever. One side is blue and one side is white, and that's a nice little touch. Also cool is the dome lights. In this car, you don't have to push a switch to turn on a dome light or press the light and have it click in and click out. Instead, just tap the light and it's on. Tap it and it's off. It's capacitive touch. It can sense when your hand is there, and so you just tap it and it does what you want it to do. Other cool things, even though Lexus has gotten some flack for the remote touch interface, I have to give them credit. They have done a good job keeping the heated and cooled seats out of there. Instead, they're simple buttons just like they should be in the center console. You press it, you turn on the heated seats, you press it, and you turn on the cooled seats. My only gripe is you can't turn them both on at the same time. But what if I want my butt to be hot and cold, Lexus? Come on. So those are the RC-F's quirks, and now it's time to drive it. But before I do, I need to go over a couple of this car's drawbacks compared to the BMW M4, which is its chief rival. This engine isn't one of them. The RC-F has 467 horsepower compared to the M4's 425 horsepower, or 444 if you opt for the performance package. More importantly, the RC-F uses a cool, old-school, naturally aspirated V8 compared to the BMW's newfangled turbocharged stuff. No, the problem is here. You see, the BMW M4 offers two transmissions. There's a manual, which is what enthusiasts drive, and a dual clutch automatic, which is what enthusiasts drive when they want to go fast. Now, the RC-F has an old school torque converter automatic. Yes, it's been upgraded, so it's not as slow as the 4-speed from the 1997 Lexus ES300, but it's still an old transmission and old technology, and it hurts this car's performance. And so does the weight. Lexus doesn't seem to believe in trying to make this car lighter, but rather just adding more power to compensate for the weight. The result is that this car ends up being about 400 pounds heavier than the BMW M4, and the result of that is that this thing does 0 to 60 in something like 4.3, 4.4 seconds. The M4 does it in 3.9. And with that in mind, time to drive it. Now, unfortunately, the driving portion of this review is not available. I'm going to blame technology for that, because if technology didn't exist, then I wouldn't have been able to accidentally delete the driving portion a couple of weeks ago. Checkmate, technology. Anyway, so what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to tell you about driving the car instead of have you look at me while I'm driving the car. These were the things that I liked. I really liked how comfortable it was. The seats are really comfortable. The ride quality is really good. It's a lot more comfortable than the M4. I also liked all the materials when you're driving around. You look at the interior, it's very beautiful. It really is a nice place to spend time, and it feels like more of a luxury car than the M4. It really does. The drawbacks, though, are obvious. I mean, it clearly feels like there's a lot of power, but it's dulled by the transmission regardless of what setting you have it in. Even in Sport or Sport Plus, the transmission is just not tremendously quick. You really can feel that the shifts are a little lazier and frankly a little more designed for comfort, like a luxury car. And it's the same thing when you go around corners. The steering is light. It's not vague. It's relatively precise, but it's still very light, sort of like you'd expect from a Lexus RX. Basically, the steering wheel is just too easy to turn. I would like a little bit more feedback so I know where the road is, and you get that in BMW and Audi. They also have light steering, but they give you more feedback than the RC-F. More importantly, though, when you're going around corners, especially when you're going around them hard, you can really feel the heft of the RC-F. It's just a really heavy car. 400 pounds more than an M4 is no joke, because the M4 is not a small car itself. This isn't the days of the E36 M3 from the 90s. The M4 has gotten big. And so 400 pounds on top of the M4 is really seriously heavy. And when you add in the fact that it has the torque converter auto and the extra weight, it kind of negates the horsepower advantage that the RC-F has. In the end, the M4 is faster and it feels faster too. This isn't to say that the RC-F is all bad, but I guess the way I would sum up the RC-F driving experience is this. There is a perfect person out there for the RC-F, and it is this person. It is someone who wants M4 sort of performance and excitement, but doesn't want to put up with a harsh ride, doesn't need quick steering or handling, they're not going on a track. They just sort of want the performance, the straight line acceleration, but they want more of a comfortable luxury cruiser type car. And the RC-F is a good combination of a luxury cruiser and a fast M4-ish car in terms of acceleration and somewhat in terms of handling. It's not going to be the fastest car on the road. In fact, it's not even the fastest car in its segment, but it is a car that's fun to drive and exciting while still being sort of luxurious and comfortable, if those are two things that you want to combine. It's for people maybe who are a little bit too old for the M4, let's put it that way. That's the buyer for this car, but it ultimately is not an M4 beater. And so that's the Lexus RC-F. It's a handsome, fun, powerful car with a lot of equipment, but it just isn't on the level of the BMW M4. It's heavier than the M4, sure, and the steering and handling isn't as good as the M4, and the transmission isn't as good as the M4, and it's slower than the M4, but none of those things are the main reason why this car isn't as good as the M4. The main reason is right here. To be clear, I don't mean the Lexus brand name. I think Lexus has a strong, established brand name. They have great engineers, and I think that if they really wanted to, Lexus could make a performance car that was better than the BMW M4. I think the problem is that Lexus simply refuses to commit to making such a car. Let me explain what I mean. BMW makes a full line of M cars, M versions of basically the entire product line. Lexus only makes an F version of this car and of the GS, which is a sedan that nobody buys. They can't even be bothered to make a high-performance F version of the IS to rival the popular BMW M3. The current IS has been out for 5 years now, and no F version appears to be forthcoming. Instead of making a true high-performance brand, Lexus's F brand appears to be devolving into cosmetic options designed to make the RX crossover look sporty, which it isn't. The simple truth is this: Lexus needs to decide if they want to make purely luxury cars like Lincoln or Acura, or if they want to make luxury and performance cars like BMW and Cadillac. This weird in-between thing leads to half-hearted attempts like the RC-F. The thing is, this is a good car, but it's the safety school of high-performance luxury coupes. You don't buy the RC-F because it's the best car, you buy it because it's the best deal. And with that in mind, on to the DougScore.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, I like how the RC-F looks, and I like the subtle changes over the regular RC, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Handling is good, but not as sharp as it should be, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Fun factor is only okay. It's fun to drive fast in a straight line, but I really think this is more luxury cruiser than thrilling sports car, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Finally, there's cool factor, and this does okay but not great. It turns a few heads, but it's not universally shocking or even particularly well known, and it gets a 5 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 30 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories, starting with features. The RC-F has a lot of stuff, but nothing truly exceptional, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Comfort is exceptional for this segment, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Quality is high. Not only is the interior really nice, but this car also has the advantage of Lexus reliability. It falls only just short of the Lexus LC, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Practicality is average for this segment, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Finally, there's value, and the simple truth is, for the $75,000 or so that these generally go for when equipped with options, there are just a lot of other cars I'd buy first. It gets only a 5 out of 10, bringing the total daily score to 32 out of 50. Added up, and the DougScore is 62 out of 100, which is decent. Here's a comparison next to a few somewhat similar cars, though I haven't yet DougScored the M4. The RC-F does well, especially in daily categories for a coupe, but it's just not top dog in this segment.